Welcome to Reflect, Grow, Thrive, a webinar series hosted by the YWCA in celebration of International Day of the Girl. I'd like to begin today's session with an acknowledgement of country. So we acknowledge today, I know that we're all on different lands, and today I am speaking to you from Larrakia country. So I'd like to acknowledge Larrakia people as the traditional owners of the Darwin region, and pay our respect to Larrakia elders past and present, and just say that we're committed to a positive future for Aboriginal communities. So next we will go into just a bit of housekeeping. So we've got, thank you for putting up the slides, Sarah. So this session is closed captioned live through Zoom. So there might be a few errors in the transcript. If anyone's having any issues through with the transcript, please send us a message through the Q&A function, and let us know if you're having any issues at all, or if we can repeat anything that may not have been converted to text properly. For any questions, please use the Q&A function. It'll be moderated throughout the session. We will have 15 minutes dedicated to the Q&A at the end of the session. Just to let everyone know, we'll also be recording today's session live, and it will be shared in approximately 2 weeks after the webinar, I believe, on YouTube. We acknowledge that some of the topics discussed during the Reflect, Grow, Thrive series may be sensitive and resonate with you in different ways. So if you need to take a break at any time, please do so. Please grab a cup of tea or turn off your camera. Don't think I can see anybody else's, but it's fine. So YWCA staff are also available, and you can message them again via the Q&A chat for anything at all. And then finally, we'll be sharing a survey on Friday afternoon, and we'd love your feedback on any of the sessions that you've attended this week. Today, I believe, is our last session, so I'm really excited to be here chatting with you all. My name is, that helps, my name is Alexandra Hatzibalsamas. You can call me Alex. I am based in Darwin, up in the Northern Territory, and I'm super excited to be hosting today's session. It's like a bit of a personal story about why I'm so excited to be here. I can remember being a really young kid in like primary school and seeing, you know, those kids that may have been a bit of a bully, being bullied, and always being the first person to go and stand up for them, even if they weren't so nice for me. And then it's really weird. So I'm half Greek and I'm named after my grandmother, but super coincidentally and on theme, my name means helper and defender of mankind. So I love these discussions. As you can probably tell, I talk a lot, but I'm also really conscious about making sure that we listen as well as talk. So I'm really happy to be here to learn about how we can be better allies to one another. And yeah, I will introduce each of my speakers for today. We're very lucky. We have Belle Owen who will be joining us. I will have each of our speakers introduce themselves in a minute. We also have Swathi Shanmukhasundaram. I was saying that so much better before. Sorry, Swathi. And Georgie Vine has also joined us today. Belle, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you so much, Alex. I'm so excited to be working with you. So my name is Belle Owen. I'm a proud disabled woman. I've lived with my disability since birth, and I have done a lot of work in and out of the disability space. So I spent a lot of time as a writer, and have also worked in Toronto in Canada for a fashion designer who had a line of clothing that was tailored specifically around a seated frame. So we had a lot of marketing directed at the disability community. Since I've moved back to Australia, I previously worked at YWCA Australia in a role that aimed to improve chances for women who live with disability to gain employment. And I currently work at a social profit organisation where we do policy and advocacy for the disabled community.
Thank you, Belle, and I'll hand over to Georgie.
Hello, everyone. I might just acknowledge initially I'm coming at live to everyone from Brisbane, and I'm currently on Turrbal and Yagara land, which are the people around Brisbane. I am 22. I thought it was 23 yesterday, surprisingly, but oh well. I'm 22, and I am a proud Aboriginal woman with connections to the Bundjalung people of northern New South Wales. That's through my mother's side. So my grandpa, who I never get to meet because he passed a bit earlier. So he was a proud Aboriginal man, and I've sort of grown that connection a lot more recently, which is something that not a lot of people would normally come out and say, is that I'm really trying to emphasize my Indigenous connections to the land and really teach myself about my heritage and be proud of that. Education is a really, really important thing to me, which we'll get to in further discussion. I am currently still studying. I'm doing a Bachelor of Economics and Law, and I am working at the moment as well. And I've had a previous role working with my university as a women's officer, which is where I really sort of found my passion for women's rights, empowerment and advocacy. And so I'm just really starting to grow all my knowledge, all my skill set, all my discussions, and sort of engaging and participating in discussions like this, I think is extremely beneficial. So I'm very, very thankful to be here. So thank you for having me on the panel, and I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Thank you, Georgie. And Swathi, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. It's so lovely to be here with Belle and Georgia. You guys are amazing. I'm Swathi. I'm coming to you from Naarm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I also pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I am currently the Youth Leadership and Advocacy Officer to Mayan Australia, who are the Multicultural Youth Advocacy Network, and they're a national organisation working to influence the agenda for refugee and migrant young people and build the capacity of the sector and organisations that work with them. I'm also connected with the Centre for Multicultural Youth as their project support officer on a few different programs, and also working on a program called Takeover Melbourne. And before that, I bring with me a human rights law background. So I'm also a lawyer and worked in human rights law for a number of years within a lot of asylum seekers and people navigating migration law processes in Australia. And I'm also the co-founder and director of an initiative called the Vermilion Project, which is focused on promoting the social and economic participation of people affected by invisible illnesses. So we put lived experience and a real focus on increasing representation at all levels at the centre of our work. So I'm really, really passionate about promoting and upskilling the self-advocacy skills of our young people and of the sector.
Thank you so much. I will also just quickly, if you would like to, in the Q&A session, pop in the lands that you're on today. We would love to know where everyone is from. I will also just say that during the conversations that we'll be having today, we want to be really mindful not to put the emotional labour back on affected groups and communities by asking you to show us or educate us on how to do better. We want to use this as hopefully an open and useful conversation about allyship and how young women can better support one another. As well as engaging with the panel, we encourage all participants to go away and do your own research, read books and articles, listen to podcasts, attend rallies, join activist groups, etc., and use the resources that are already out there to educate yourself. If you're new to the YWCA, we have an online activist group called CBF. It's for cyber feminists, and everyone is welcome to join. Yeah, so it's just to acknowledge that, you know, we're all learning and to go out and do our own research too. But I will hand over to Belle now, and Belle will explain to us, if you will please, for people who are new to the term ally, can you please explain to us what it means?
Thank you so much. And if everybody couldn't tell before, I get really flustered talking about myself. So I didn't acknowledge that I'm on Kaurna land today, and I acknowledge the leaders past, present and emerging. And my pronouns are she, her, and I usually do that when I introduce myself whenever I'm talking, but the bio thing just threw me a little, so I do apologize. But yeah, so speaking today about allyship. So whenever I speak, I usually kind of talk about allyship in the context of the disability community, but this sort of does apply across the board. So to me, specifically, an ally is someone who, although they don't have specific lived experience, use their resources, whether it be time, money, political standing, whatever privileges that they have, to contribute to the social justice movement of other groups. And in feminist spaces, we do hear the term ally a lot. And so I think it's really important to kind of acknowledge that, you know, ally and calling yourself ally is a verb, and verbs describe actions. So kind of in the spirit of the name of the chat today, which is action, not words, I think it's really important to acknowledge that being an ally is more than just sort of saying you are. You know, it's about action, and it's about accountability, and about, you know, being proactive in your push for social justice.
Thank you so much, Belle. I think that leads into a perfect question. Anybody can chime in at any time, but I'm probably going to direct it at Georgie, especially in the first instance. I wanted to know, Georgie, what's the difference between being a genuine ally and a performative or optic movement, or a performative optic ally?
Yeah.
I can do
Yeah,
that
cool.
Thank you.
We got there in the end. Yeah, that's all that matters. So yeah, I think this is a perfect transition on from Belle's question. Like, you answered that so beautifully, and I agree with everything you said, that I think we need to really understand that ally is a verb, like it is that doing word. So it's not enough just to say, it's that action. So that's a really important part of being a genuine ally for, and sort of similar to Belle, I constantly come at this through like an Indigenous perspective, as well as just general women's, but like we have to really understand our privilege, and understanding our privilege is sometimes quite hard to do, and it can often, it's like a big reality check in a lot of instances. But however, I think that's the first thing that we need to overcome in order to better perform as a genuine ally to people. And that comes with everything, like listening is an extremely important factor, listening as opposed to speaking, and listening in order to understand the other person as opposed to thinking of your answer in your head and being quite reactive. So I think listening in that sense, as well as educating yourself, is extremely important. And we need to also acknowledge that allyship, like it's something that's been going on. Like we can't come into a fight thinking that we're the first people there. Like I read an article not too long ago, and I may really butcher this saying, and apologies in advance, but they're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, and just sort of that entire fight for people of color. Like the person who authored the article stated that it's like coming to a dinner party 400 years late. You can't catch up within 5 minutes. And we have to acknowledge that people have been having these fights for hundreds of years. We're only sort of just joining them as their allies. So yeah, like summary from Belle, like perfect. But being an optic and performative ally, I think has become quite common, sadly to say. Like this is my own view, of course, but especially within recent times, like the Black Lives Matter movement, I think that really showed that people were quite like definitely willing to get on board. And don't get me wrong, I really think that performative allyship, although it's not the best type of allyship, it could lead into those discussions of what a performative ally is, what genuine allyship is. So I think that there is, well, I don't want to be controversial, but I think there is like a place for performative allyship to lead into discussions of how to then become a genuine ally. And I think that is something that is quite important. But an optic ally, I think I put down some notes that I have a little quote that someone had defined allyship as, and I might just quickly read that out. And it's, optic allyship, sorry. I'm getting a bit flustered now. Allyship that serves at the surface level to platform the ally. It makes a statement but doesn't go beneath the surface and is not aimed at breaking away from the systems of power that oppress. And that was by Latham Thomas, who the article had stated coined the term optic ally. And I think that is a perfect way to sum it up. Like it is performing without action. It is posting, it's like posting a Martin Luther King quote without knowing the work that Martin Luther King had done. It is posting a black tile without knowing the meaning of what actually the black tile movement was. Like, it's simple things like that. It's often influenced by social media now, which I know it's hard to sort of stomach, because we don't want to think that social media plays that big of a role in our lives, but it really does. And I think that really is a catalyst point for performative allyship and optic allyship. So hopefully I answered your question, Alex. Maybe a bit long runs, but yeah.
I think you've both led into it perfectly. You've spoken about how, it's really easy for people to be well-intentioned and to be outraged by something that they've heard. But then, to just share a post on social media, if you don't really know what it's about, you've absolutely said, go out and educate yourself, find out more what you can do, or, in the instance of it looking more performative or optic, well, at least it is, I guess, a great point to begin the conversation. But, we definitely encourage people to take it that step further. I think, are there any instances, any of my panel members can please jump in here, have there been any instances in Australia or internationally that you've seen recently that have been really good examples of impactful allyship?
If people don't have an example, I'm happy to jump in. Yeah, so the actual example, like the instance of the allyship, isn't recent, but I've learned about it a lot more recently. So I don't know if you have seen Crip Camp on Netflix, an amazing movie about the disability rights movement, but watching that kind of really highlighted the way that the Black Panthers supported people with disability to in their sit-in in 1977, and where like it was kind of the birth of the disability rights movement in America. And when they were sitting in, the Black Panthers supported them through bringing food and supplies and things that they needed. And like, I think like, while it's not recent, it's such a powerful, like, it's such a powerful example, and it's also readily available for everybody. So if you do kind of want to check it out, it's like they're right there on Netflix for everyone to look at.
That is awesome. Thank you. I think I've decided my afternoon viewing. Does anyone have any other examples to add?
I think more recently, and I think a lot of the buzzier examples could be a lot of the examples that are coming out of pop culture and people in the media industry, where you've got male actors or higher ups, more specifically, taking pay cuts to support their female counterparts, or perhaps even employees or fellow colleagues on the same level who are being paid less than they are. And one of my favorites was actually, I forgot what it's called. It's like the online cooking show. It's not coming to me immediately, but where the cast members realised that the cast members, specifically those people of colour, were being paid significantly less than the content contributors who were white, and specifically who were white and male, which was a really interesting thing. And even when that came up to negotiations, they reached nowhere near the same level of pay parity that they wanted to. And that resulted in two incredibly talented POC chefs just leaving that particular show. And I only use that example because it's like a popular sort of one that everyone could know about. But I think those are sort of surface level, but also really important actions for people to take. Like that's what we're talking about. It's about the actions. It's not just saying, oh, that's a really big problem, I want you guys to fix this. Someone's gone, I absolutely want to be part of the solution, and I'm going to take a pay cut and give you some of my income to make this a level playing field.
Yep, I definitely agree. And I can give another example, sort of within, I'm not sure when it happened, and I'm not 100% a tennis diehard fan, so I'm not sure of the actual players who I'm going to reference, except Serena Williams, of course. But there was an instance where she called the umpire, a thief or something like that, just as like most tennis players can just have like a bit of that back chat towards umpires. But then she got penalized extremely harshly for calling the umpire a thief. And then one male tennis player, I'm not too sure who it was, if someone knows, they can comment or whatever who this player was, but spoke out against it and was saying, no, like, I have called umpires 10 times worse things than a thief and nothing happened to me. So it's again just calling out instances like that are really important, and especially in sporting circumstances where often women or people of colour are paid 10 times less than a white, cis, able-bodied person. Like, I think that's an extremely important thing that we need to start being conscious of and start building the confidence and educating ourselves in that way to have the assurance within ourselves to properly comment on situations like that. So that's another sort of example. Yeah.
And I love that you highlighted the calling out, Georgie, especially when it comes to media. And I feel I have to raise this, but, you know, we're living among COVID-19 restrictions at the moment. And I'm sure almost everyone thought, or at least where I'm from, I'm living in Melbourne, some of the toughest restrictions we've got so far. And over the weekend, there were news reports of people at the beach out in St Kilda, just having the time of their lives, not wearing masks, not following any of the restrictions. And there was next to no police presence. You couldn't see any unrest among those crowds, and there was no follow-up, no social media harassment of anyone who appeared in those videos who were predominantly young white people or just white appearing people. And then you contrast that with news reports of maybe a handful of young people from areas where there are high concentrations of refugee and migrant people who live there. For example, Dandenong's one of our most diverse suburbs here, and it's also the one that's received the highest number of fines for COVID-19 infringements, for example. And just, you don't see enough people calling out the absolute disparity, the absolute like difference in media coverage, but also the follow-up in online harassment and abuse that a lot of young people of colour experience. Or if you're just a person of colour who appears on that news report, I can guarantee that they would have received 10 times the amount of harassment and scrutiny and just vitriol rather than reports like that.
Thank you. Yeah. I think that you've both touched on, and Belle has as well, in, you know, these are the things that we can go and view in, you know, whether it's in the media or if it's pop culture. You talk about young people, Swathi, and we know that, you know, the likes of Serena Williams, are, you know, role models for our young people. Working in the youth leadership space, for the different causes and organisations that you've worked for, Swathi, do you think that young people are leading the way in demonstrating what it means to be an ally? Georgie was touching on before about, you know, calling things out. I wonder if maybe that's being guided by young people nowadays too.
Yeah. I have to say that it's an absolute privilege to be in a position to work with the incredible up-and-coming young people that I get to work with at the moment. And I have to say that I'm so proud to be able to say that I believe that they are leading. That doesn't mean that necessarily that they have all of the privileges and they're able to do that comfortably, because they aren't. But they're absolutely raising their voices and breaking down barriers. And I also honestly believe that if I'm able to be in a position like in the job that I am today, coming from the background that I do, it's because someone before me has worked really, really hard to break down those barriers and make sure that I can comfortably, and not only comfortably be in this position, but be in a position where I can use all of the resources at my disposal to make things easier for the young people who will come after me, which is absolutely what I want to do. And one of the favourite moments that comes to mind for me is I've been in a lot of different youth programs and leadership programs that we've got coming up. One of the great ones was the Create Change Fellowship that Democracy in Colour runs by Tim. And I helped co-facilitate one of their workshops, and they were asked to do an activity where they had to draw someone who inspires them. And usually you get, you know, your run-of-the-mill, anyone who's received an Australia Day honour, you get like all of your regulars. And then one of the participants named Harpreet Dillon, who's actually connected to Young Women's Council as well, and like drew a little picture of her. And I don't think I've cried more than I have in my life. If nobody knows about her, I would encourage you to look her up. But yeah, and I asked her why she chose her, and she said she's just this amazing brown woman who is every time I see what she's doing, she's out on the streets with a megaphone, you know, protesting, being an excellent ally, whether it comes to, you know, Black Lives Matter, whether it comes to acknowledging Aboriginal Lives Matter, and just constantly raising her voice and being that person to, you know, being that activist, being a rebel, making people uncomfortable and being really unapologetic about it. Like, you hear one person say that and you can really see that that's what representation does. Like, that's the power of representation. Young people name other young people like them doing amazing things. So I am thrilled and like, just, yeah, love to be able to say that I think that we're getting there. But we need to be doing a lot more work to support those young people, acknowledging that it's on us to educate ourselves and to listen to them. And that's why I really love telling people that it's about holding space, and being ready to listen, being ready to challenge ourselves, and being ready to constantly correct ourselves. Because a lot of the time, especially when we talk about allyship, and Georgie touched on this really great, in a really great way, is that people get really defensive. They don't want to be called out. They don't want to think that they've made mistakes, and they want to feel like the expert that they are. And so what we need to be doing is approaching things from a place of respect, especially when we work with young people, and empowering and loving and respecting the expertise that they bring to the table. And especially when it comes to refugee and migrant youth, because I think there's this inbuilt response to authority that a lot of us have, which is that we're not really that expert, that I can't sit on a panel and talk about my experiences, that I can't write an article and put it out there in the world unless I have a PhD, unless I have like 20 other degrees, unless I have 10 years of experience. And that's why you never used to see that, but also because our societies don't give us that permission to speak up. So being able to say, no, you're an expert and what you're saying is absolutely valuable is, I think, is everything. And yeah, so liking, sharing, and cheerleading on all of your friends who do that is, I think, is such a special thing to do.
I think, you know, you've really well summed up some of my next question was going to be to you about some of the common roadblocks that keep young people from, you know, turning those good intentions into actions. And I think, you know, you've mentioned that it can be really uncomfortable. And, you know, that, yeah, you think that you're not the expert and, you know, we're constantly learning. And that's why I love these conversations. You know, it's meeting people like you, Georgie and Belle, who help to educate us to learn more, and, you know, so that we're educating ourselves. Are there any other common roadblocks that you reckon keep young people from, I guess, turning some of those good intentions into actions?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the main ones is an unfortunate one, but it's sometimes your own community. So for example, I come from an Indian Tamil community and I'm a proud Tamil woman and a migrant who's been living here for quite some time, and I grew up in some really, really white neighborhoods. But I think coming from that place where, you know, the migrant mentality and being a model migrant where you have to work really hard and do really well and, you know, give back to society and just not put a foot wrong, basically, it's really scary for young people. Like, and, you know, we talk about how they're experts and how we want to elevate them and make sure they're going to be great leaders in the world, but you also want to give them space to be young people and make mistakes. And it's really hard to make a mistake. Even, for example, on a panel like this, if I said something wrong, that's a terrifying thing. And to be called up on it and to think like, oh my God, I'm going to disgrace my entire community because maybe you are the only person from your community in that space doing that work. I think it's important to acknowledge that it's scary to do these things. And so the only way that we can really get over that is to create more opportunities and more spaces where they can practice, where they can make mistakes really safely and where they can learn. And I think that making those mistakes safely goes to, you know, effective allyship and recognizing that, yes, those people are learning, they're up and coming. And if you're someone who's more experienced and more knowledgeable, what can I do to extend a hand and support them and build their capacity? I think that's a really positive way to turn things around instead of calling someone out, for example. But when I say my own community, it also goes back to stigma. Like, I love how Belle can just open up and say, you know, I'm a proud disabled woman. That's not something people from my community could necessarily say because it's got such a just such a stigma attached to it. And in my work, we've got a network of young leaders through our youth advocacy network at Mayan, and it's something that they really proudly work to break down, is those different intersectional identities that we all have, and giving young people the literacy, the confidence, and identifying those different spaces where they can really proudly share those things and break those barriers down one by one. And I think the other main barrier that we know exists and have to talk about is tokenism, like just being at pure risk of tokenism constantly. And a really great personal example that I bring is, for example, when I worked in the legal industry, they used to have lots of legal awards, which are really great, and they would have diversity and inclusion categories for awards. And of course, we know diversity and inclusion has become such a buzzword. People love it. People love as diversity and inclusion. And a really poor example of allyship, or just of being inclusive, is whenever those award seasons would come around, they would want to apply and would trot out the people of colour who worked for them. And I speak Tamil and worked as a translator for many Sri Lankan asylum seekers in Australia. I've donated hundreds of hours of interpreting time through my language skills. Would be asked to, speak in Tamil for a video. But during the entire time that, I was at this particular place, didn't receive any sort of diversity and inclusion training. None of the staff members did. I also navigated an invisible illness, never received any formal supports or mentorship for that. This application would go off and they would be shortlisted as a leader, and many other leaders within those lists. I've spoken to people from those different organisations and haven't heard of any training. Do they give back to Aboriginal organisations? Do they partner with organisations led by people of colour, centering lived experience in their training materials? We don't know any of that, and they just hand out awards to people. And so I think raising the bar and in being effective allies, we need to really be questioning those examples so that the young people who come after us don't have to go through horrible things like that. Because I reflect on experiences like that. That's only one experience, but there are a lot of them. And I take those and I tell, the young people that I work with, these are things that could happen. And if they happen, you need to follow your gut and you need to find your allies, people who are going to support you, and you need to see if you can speak up. So yeah, it's just, we really need to recognize that tokenism is something that can happen. Be really careful of it, be willing to listen and fix it. And if you're in the room with someone where you can feel that happening, can you speak up and support them? Because it's really scary and sometimes can put your career at risk if you're that person that has to speak up.
Absolutely. You've covered so many important topics for us right now. I just want to remind everyone as well that if you have any questions at all that you would like to ask our panel members, any of them, all of them, let us know. I'm just looking at a comment at the moment as well, which, we have a listener who said that they've noticed recently that especially in the vice president's face-off in America, that the male speakers continually talk over the female speakers, even when the host tells them not to, and how male reporters didn't even notice it and it's been completely normal, which totally reminded me of something that I was reading recently about the presidential campaign, and it referred to a community group that referred to their female leaders literally as women leaders, not just leaders. And I think that's, very tokenistic and not a very good ally. So, they're the horrible examples that we see every day. I think that, so a reminder, questions. If you have any, please send them to us. I'll hand over to Belle. I was wondering, acknowledging that we're all developing in our feminism all the time, I know that Swathi and Georgie have mentioned it as well, that, we're constantly learning, educating ourselves, we're worried about saying the wrong thing. What should happen when someone who's trying to be an ally makes a mistake? And what do you think they can do to amend the situation in a way that acknowledges impact and not just intent?
Thank you. I think that we have to firstly acknowledge that we are going to make mistakes and not really talk about them as hypotheticals, because it's more of a when than an if. And making sure, as Swathi said, that we're creating spaces where people are feeling safe to learn and are feeling safe to make mistakes. And it is obviously important that how we make amends for a situation is really contextual. obviously it depends on the impact that you have had as to what, you know, you should be doing. But I feel like if someone is in like a less privileged position than you, and they, you know, they use their energy to kind of let you know that maybe you're off course, maybe, you know, what you know, when you have this really good intention, maybe the impact is like, you know, negative. It's really difficult. It takes a lot to be able to address those kinds of things. And so I feel like we need to kind of take those uncomfortable learning opportunities as the privilege that they are. You know, for me, especially when people are really confident that they're like doing the right thing or saying the right thing, you know, taking that time to kind of like address it is really difficult. And it takes a lot of, you know, navigating for me on like, how do I approach this? How do I not embarrass that person? You know, just kind of assuming that they are coming from that good place. You know, and I know that it's natural to want to defend your position, especially when you have been in that, you know, like you've put yourself out there, you've been vulnerable, you've been trying to, you know, like make a difference in this positive way. But I feel like it's really crucial to thank people for the learning opportunities that they give you. And, you know, apologizing is okay as long as you don't center yourself in the apology, and you're kind of really actually thinking about like what it is that you're apologizing for. And I think that the best way that you can respect what that person has done is to adopt that new information and adjust moving forward, and, you know, be really not performative, but like quite visible in the fact that you've actioned, you know, the correction that you've gotten.
Thanks, Belle. I think that leads really nicely into a question we've just been asked as well. And I think it will also touch on when Georgie was explaining the difference of, you know, allyship that is, you know, probably quite tokenistic. We have a question that is, how do we show allyship without centering our own voices by mistake? So in spaces where we know we should be listening and giving the mic to people who, you know, are being affected by whatever we're sharing content about, whether it's on social media or something that we're talking about, how do we make sure that we are doing that in a way that is, you know, actively providing allyship, but also, yeah, making sure not to take the mic away from people?
I might step in. I think that is a really, really good question, and also quite a difficult question to answer at the same time, because you don't want to take away your own voice, because your own voice is extremely important. But I think in terms of what you can do to be an active, genuine ally in situations like that, is really maybe take a tiny bit of a step back, look for the people in your community who are doing the work, and then initially promote their voice through your own social media platform. It's probably extremely beneficial for you to have your own opinion, and no doubt you have your own opinion and your own take on everything like that. Share it, definitely share it. Just do your initial Googles, your initial research into the area that you are going to talk about, to really educate yourself and see if anyone else is discussing that point, so you can build upon it, not over it, if that makes sense, if I've answered that.
Absolutely.
Well,
I really like that, building upon it and not over it. Absolutely.
And if I could add to that, oh, sorry, Alex.
No,
if I could add to that, I feel like at the beginning you said it really well, which is that don't pretend like you're the first person to talk about or deal with a certain issue, because you're most definitely probably not about 99% of the time. And I think that's where people go wrong, is when they act like they're the only ones to do that, and just don't acknowledge or have done any research about who else is doing whatever it is they're doing within that spaces, which is why we often don't see a lot of the works or voices of people of colour or of our Black, Indigenous, you know, ancestors coming forward, when they may well have had those conversations or done that work. And personally, in my work in the youth space, I'm a huge advocate of co-design. So if you're running an event on, for example, disability, if you're running an event on, I don't know, the plight of refugee and migrant young people, can you actually work with them to design that session? And can you make sure you're adequately reimbursing them for whatever work it is that you're asking them to do? There's a really big difference between asking people for unpaid labour and exhausting their emotional resources there's a big difference between that and actually working with them and partnering with them to deliver something really meaningful. And I think that's where sometimes people get really scared. They go, oh, but I don't want to exhaust their emotional labor, so I'm not going to talk to them and I'll just try to do something on my own. It's okay to not completely understand something, but absolutely do your research, do as much work as you can on your own, treat anything like you would a uni assignment, you know, look for all of the resources that you need to, and then identify the people or the experts within that field. And if you have the capacity to partner with them or invite them to the table and have that conversation, then you should absolutely do that.
Thank you. I think that's really important. We're speaking about how the change begins with educating ourselves. I want to ask, anybody can answer this one. I'd like to ask who or what has helped you the most in becoming the best ally that you can be. I think, and I kind of want to make it a two-parter if I can. So examples might be some role models or some books or just like what kind of resources. The other part of the question, so not just who or what's helped you the most in becoming the best ally, but how have allies best showed up for you as well? It's a question that we've had, and I'd really like to merge the two if I can.
Okay, I might jump in if nobody else wants to, or I'll give it a minute. Okay, in terms of what's helped me is just finally connecting with people who are passionate about the same things that I am. Like, look around the room, and if everyone in the room that you're in or in the spaces, because we're all living online obviously nowadays, if anything in your feed is like more or less the same thing, you're not seeing any dissenting voices. And you're not seeing, for example, if you are someone who shared something about Black Lives Matter or about you know, Aboriginal lives and deaths in custody, but you're not actually seeing anything about that on your feed, then maybe go back and reevaluate who it is that you've got in your network. And, you know, am I effectively using my network in the way that I should be? And if you're someone who is, you know, ready to do that work and wants to engage within those spaces, what are the organizations? What are the different people that I can follow and that I can listen to? If there are organizations that I love, I make sure to find anyone that works there, their founders, and, you know, follow them ridiculously, share their work, because that's part of being an effective ally. But one thing that I think people are often scared to do is reach out and ask to have a coffee with them, and just have a chat with them. Because people are more than willing to share their wisdom. And this is something I pass on to the young people that we work with as well, is to be really confident in asking people for help and to share their wisdom. And again, there's a difference between having a casual coffee with someone and just chatting to them and getting to know them, as opposed to, you know, bordering on kind of extrapolating information from them and trying to take their work, which has happened to me in the past, where coffees have turned into free consults, and that's a really dangerous thing that can happen. And so, you know, teaching people how to address those boundaries appropriately, but there's never any harm in reaching out to a founder, or just someone who is insanely cool, and sending them like a LinkedIn message and saying, hey, I really love this thing that you wrote. I really love this video that you produced. I really love what work your organization does. Can you tell me a little bit more about it and how I can get involved? And yeah, making sure you have those boundaries is all about just making sure you've actually read about whoever it is that you're going to call out to, and not just looking up diverse speakers on a list and then, you know, and then just emailing the first two that you see. That's not the way that you should do it. Sorry, Alex, I remember your question was a two-parter, so I don't remember if I've answered the second part.
That's okay. The other part of that question was, how have allies best showed up for our panellists in their lives?
I'll quickly add that some of the best examples have been when I've been asked to speak on panels, or where there have been other people speaking on panels and they've just noticed that there's no one from that who's affected by that particular issue to speak there. For example, like a panel about refugees and asylum seekers, and if there's no one who actually is a refugee or an asylum seeker on that panel, and it's like, hey guys, what are you doing? Do you want me to help you find someone who's appropriate for this? And in my work with young people, it's about if, you know, some of our young people are being asked to speak about certain issues, are they being adequately reimbursed for their time? Are they being Are they being, are they being manipulated to do things that they perhaps shouldn't do, or they're at overcapacity and they just keep getting asked to do things, which happens a lot. So you kind of have to be that effective advocate and step in for them and say, hey, this is how much time they have. This is how much you should reimburse them. And here are some options that I can give you to help you do that. And just be really helpful and identify those spaces where they might need that extra help. Because I think a lot of people are also afraid to step in for people because it might feel a bit patronizing, or they might be like, oh, that's not my place. And it's fine to have really open conversations about that. And for me personally, that's been so helpful when I was younger and actually in those programs or being asked to speak at things, is having someone be like, they haven't paid you, they're not going to pay you for this. They're asking you to do this is actually 12 hours worth of work that you shouldn't be doing. But also, are you mentally okay? Do you actually have the space to do this? And having those conversations with your friends, with your advocate friends, with your young people is so, so important.
I absolutely agree. It's very important. Georgie, what or who has helped you the most in becoming the best ally?
Yeah. So I sort of continuing on my current workplace, we've got, of course, a diversity and inclusion committee, as most people do at the moment. And continuing on with the conversation around token diversity and tokenism, I recently have joined that diversity and inclusion committee through people acknowledging yes, I identify as Aboriginal and proudly, but there was no one on that community who, the diversity committee honestly was not very diverse. So I was more than happy to step up into that role. And although I guess looking at it through some lenses could be seen as token diversity, but in that situations like this, I think I'm more than happy to play that role in order to make and pave way for people behind me to come up and feel comfortable within the organisation that I'm currently working in. But that's probably my workplace. Oh, sorry, I have accidentally flipped your question and answered who are my allies.
That's okay.
Beforehand.
It's okay.
But yeah, so I'm extremely lucky within my current workplace that they do value my opinion and they really want to listen to what I have to say and what I speak upon, which I think is it's not extremely rare, but it's extremely encouraging to see. And it really allows me to express my own opinions to people who are wanting to actively listen to them. And with that being said, we're beginning to sort of look at developing a reconciliation action plan within our firm, which is an extremely big step. But just getting those initial discussions, talking about what it is, the importance of it, the importance of reconciliation in a whole, is an extremely valuable thing. And it's something that not many people would be there to talk about if I didn't take that first step into that role. And I listen to quite a lot of podcasts, but a book that I recently read was by, what was her name? I may say this wrong and I do apologize. I think it's pronounced Ijeoma Oluwal. And that was So You Want to Talk About Race. That was an extremely good book and I do recommend it to anyone who hasn't read it yet. So it sort of just talked about the fundamental steps for advocating for racial justice and went through experiences she'd had within her own life. Another good resource would probably be a book, I think it's Leah Sard, Me and White Supremacy. Also a very, very good read, and I would recommend it to anyone else who's trying to better themselves and really get a good understanding of context to a lot of racial issues, a lot of people of colour issues, and sort of how it all stems back through the past and how the past really does shape our future, and that's what we need to overcome. So I think I've answered the question.
Thank you, I think so. Belle, what about you? Who or what has helped you the most in becoming the best ally you can be?
Yeah, I think in my allyship, I think I've learned a lot in terms of what specifically has worked for me. I don't really hold anybody on any kind of pedestal for their allyship because we are all learning, we are all making mistakes. But I think in terms of what, you know, has worked for me. What works for me on a really individual level, like the allyship that like friends perform for me is really different to like, you know, the allyship that I experience from co-workers or from like strangers or for people who like who are working for justice for the disability rights movement in general. But I feel like it's really key that you know, we're always kind of approaching from a sense of like empathy and of learning and all of this kind of stuff. But I think you know, like what I can talk about is when people close to me can, you know, because they know me, can anticipate like things that I need and can actively work to remove barriers, you know, before I experience them. And like that kind of stuff is really powerful because like, you know, working against barriers all the time is exhausting. It's stuff that like we're doing always. And so, you know, with that closeness comes the knowledge of, you know, being able to anticipate those things that people can do, you know, in support. So, you know, when people are showing allyship specifically to me, it might be that they're, you know, sending me an Uber Eats meal or something like that because I've had a really hard day. But they know that they're contributing to work that I'm doing as well, when maybe that it isn't work that they can themselves do. And then I think it's also really important, like a really great friend is raising my two goddaughters. You know, we don't spend a lot of time together, and the allyship that she performs, not specifically for me, but for my community, is raising children who have this normalized idea of disability, who have this like really casual experience of disability as just part of the human experience. And to me, you know, maybe that's not directly impacting me. I mean, it is because, you know, I get to have amazing conversations with these kids, but also she's raising people who are then going to be extremely amazing allies tomorrow, or already are really.
I think that the three of you have explained some really awesome. There was a question in here about how it says, what do you think about having conversations about allyship for people who don't have education? Access to education in the ways that you have, and I think each of you have touched on it beautifully and in different ways as well. I know, like Swathi was talking about having conversations with people, whether it's in your community or not, and then Georgie has spoken about, you know, some wonderful books that we can all get into, and then Belle, yourself, you've spoken about, you know, the allies that are your friends, and I think that they're all just really amazing resources that we can all go to keep educating ourselves and the people around us, and it's so important. There's a question here about what people think. So, you know, when you're being in terms of allyship, I guess, what do you think about cancel culture? Keep that one open to the panel.
I love that you brought that. I love that someone brought that up. And I also want to thank the person who reminded me that the TV show I was talking about was Bon Appetit online before as well. So thank you. Cancel culture is scary and definitely very topical when you're talking about diversity and inclusion and effective allyship, and especially because we talked so much about how people need to make mistakes and not get defensive in this process of learning, which we know is ongoing. It's an evolutionary process. It's going to constantly change, and language is constantly changing, especially when it comes to complicated and sensitive issues like this. I think if you're going to be afraid of cancel culture and want to be within activism and be an effective ally, it really doesn't work, does it? But I think the one thing that we can learn from some really clear examples of cancel culture and people who have maybe navigated that correctly and not correctly is just not getting defensive in the first place. But also people who fall victim to things like that, more often than not, might have not approached the issue that they were perhaps talking about, or the mistake that they made might not have just fully informed themselves and actually done the work that we've talked about, which is just using all of the resources at your disposal to adequately inform yourself and equip yourself with the knowledge before entering different spaces or saying whatever it is that you might want to say. And if we are constantly afraid of getting cancelled, then you're not going to be doing the right thing. Your activism isn't going to be effective. And if you're someone on the receiving end or someone who might be the beneficiary of things like diversity and inclusion initiatives or of a movement, for example, it's also really, really hard to not feel like really small within those conversations as well. And it's really easy to feel emotionally overloaded when people do make those mistakes. And so I think it's on both ends, it's about recognizing, yes, people are going to make mistakes, but are you actually effectively being open? Are you open to hearing about that criticism? So if you're someone who's afraid of making those mistakes, or you've done that before, you need to just make sure that you're open to listening to other people, and you're open to apologising and acknowledging the differences in knowledge that you might have. And I think that's always where we should start from. It's a really scary space online, and so I feel like we need to make it safer for people to say it's okay if you make mistakes, but you need to be that person who's willing to acknowledge it, who's willing to listen, and who's willing to put in the work and support others who are doing that work.
Thank you so much. We've got so many great questions rolling in at the moment, and we're also running out of time. There is one great question that's also come in here about, I think, with sharing things online, we were talking about how easy that can be to do. We have a question here, wondering what panelists think about a lot of people who are now perhaps identifying as allies, but not really acting as allies. And if, this term is also allowing people to become complacent in their allyship.
I'll carry on. I think this again comes back to the conversation that we were having before around optic allyship and performative allyship. I'm just looking at the question, but then again, I think it's sort of similar to what I said before in terms of, I think it is definitely something that we need to recognize is happening. And a lot of businesses out of movement, which is really hard to hear, but it's happening. We've got to understand that things like this are going on. But we also should try and look at it in a light that these changes, although performative initially, we could maneuver and shape into a situation where they are understanding better what they're advocating for. Now, how we do that, that's a question for everyone. I don't have the answers to everything. But I think your question, Matilda, is an extremely good question. And I think it will just really depend upon the individual who is online, their community, who is supporting them, who's influencing them, coming back to who you're following on social media, because inevitably that unconsciously shapes your views on a lot of things. We've seen this through the elections, simple things like that. Facebook has algorithms and stuff like that to pop things up in your feed that or have the ability to sway your opinion or to really shape opinions like that. So I think we just really have to be conscious. I'm just reading, I'm not sure whether I'm answering your question, so to say, but we've just got to be conscious that performative allyship will more often than not be a thing. We've just got to acknowledge or sort of build solutions and strategies of how we can overcome that and how we can teach other people about what performative and optic allyship is. Because I think in a lot of situations, and sorry for rambling, but a lot of situations people may think that that is enough. And so it just comes back to really teaching them that no, that is not enough. Allyship is about the actual actions. It's not about the posts. So yes.
And so sorry, Alex, I'm going to sneak something in, but
yeah, please.
Allyship that you can engage in ongoing now, especially after the changes we've seen happen in the world because of COVID-19, and especially because working with the young people that I do, it's all about building their skills going into the workplace, and about changing things that happen in workplaces to make them more inclusive, is speak up for your disabled friends who have probably been complaining, fighting and asking for a lot of the things that have now happened within the various workplaces that anyone who's attending might exist within. I'm sure you come from various industries. Speak up for them, make sure that any of the changes that your organisations have implemented stay or that they get better, and don't let them get away with reverting to the old ways of doing things. That's one thing that you can do if you're someone who's I want to help, but I'm not sure how to. that's something that you can do. Like, don't get your workplaces, your organizations, if you're a volunteer for an organization, if they haven't changed the way that they're doing things, if they haven't reevaluated their, inclusion policies, their equity policies, their the way that they teach themselves about diversity, then you should seriously be questioning whether you're doing the right thing as an ally and whether your organization is doing the right thing as someone who is responsible for you.
I think that's a very important reminder, and I think that's really a great way to turn some of the things that we've learned in today's session into action. I think one last question, I'm really sorry because we're trying to keep to our hour, is do you think that this is open to all panel members? Do you think there's anything that we're leaving out of this discussion that we should address?
I might quickly just jump in and just acknowledge Rachel's question, because she noted, or she just questioned, how does your white passing privilege affect your allyship? And I'm extremely glad that you brought this up, because I think it is such an important privilege that I have to check myself. I'm extremely lucky, or not lucky, sorry, that was an extremely bad word to use, but really conscious that I am not obviously a Black person, a Black Aboriginal person. I'm white passing, so I need to check my privilege in that sense. I really need to acknowledge that I can't sympathise completely. I can't understand 100% those that suffer who are a visible person of colour. And I check that. I definitely check that. And I think that's something that I really have come to sort of overcome in the recent months. I've been told, because it's something that I've internally struggled with, like identifying as Indigenous, but obviously blonde hair, blue eyes, I'm not your typical like person of color. And so one of my like mentors I have in my life told me, like coffee is coffee no matter how much milk's in it. I don't know whether people have heard that, but I just absolutely love that. And it really ground myself in knowing that I do have connections to like Aboriginal lands, like my grandpa, my entire mother's side. Like I'm very, very fortunate, and I'm very willing to learn about all of that. But again, back to Rachel's question, I am sort of in the middle. I can see into both sides of both the person of color and then the white passing side. So I think that is a very, very good question, and it does affect my allyship quite a lot. I need to step back and listen to those people of color. Like I'm not the one that's going to be up there forefront telling everyone what to do, because I'm one of those people that need to listen. I need to promote their voice. So yeah, I just thought I may address that question while we're here.
Thank you for that. I like that. We talk about intersectional feminism and how, there's no borders, there's no lines around that. And it's, you're an ally for your own cause as well, which we all need to be. It goes around, back to our education, of course. I just wanted to say thank you all so much, Belle, Georgie, Swathi. Thank you for your time and for sharing your insights and your expertise today. I think that you've given the audience and I a lot to consider and a lot to think about. I just wanted to shout out to our to our attendees today as well, and just thank you so much. If you've got any additional questions, please reach out to the YWCA team. You can send an email to giving, G-I-V-I-N-G, at ywca.org.au. If you want to continue some of these discussions, we also, like I mentioned at the start, have our cyber feminist group, which is on Facebook. There's also a WhatsApp, and the YWCA Australia are, of course, on all of your favourite socials. Yeah, thank you for your time and have a wonderful weekend.